Welcome to the Elijah Rising podcast. Elijah Rising is an organization empowering women recovering from sexual exploitation. This episode is going to help you become more aware about the issue of sex trafficking and inspire you to take action.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Elijah Rising podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different. We're not in the studio because my dear friend Youngbee is in Ohio. And welcome to the show, Youngbee Dale. This is Youngbee's second time on our podcast. And I will say it was very interesting how we got connected. We were actually doing a month of prayer and fasting to combat human trafficking, specifically the Asian trafficking piece. And out of the blue, Youngbee just called us and was like, I can't remember the question you asked, but like, what are you doing to fight trafficking in Houston? And I was like, oh my God, that's such like a pointed question. And so that kind of started our connection. And you've just been a valuable resource for us. You've informed a lot of our awareness efforts on trafficking, specifically of Asian women, the illicit massage parlors, and other areas, especially the topic we're going to get into this podcast, which is something that not many people focus on, is the criminals, which you would think in a criminal, a criminal enterprise, you think the main focus would be on the criminals, but oftentimes a lot of efforts are focused on victims, which is great, on the people that are buying. But, we want to dig into who the traffickers are and, kind of these larger networks, these larger players. And so, Youngbee, welcome to the show. I didn't do too much of introducing you and all of your accolades, but maybe just tell our listeners, who you are, what you do, and how you got involved in the anti-trafficking space.
I'm a CEO at Dale Consulting. I have my consulting business, but not to say that I make a lot of money. I was called to fight the trafficking in 2005, and I really started focusing on domestic side of the U.S. Trafficking market since 2009. Then I realized there's a gap between what's been reported in Korean language as opposed to what's been reported in English language. So that became my first publication in 2016. Since then, I've just been really focusing on studying more about the trafficking and trafficking organization, criminality in general. And initially I started my work just focusing on East Asian trafficking activities. And then as I dig deeper into it, I just figured why not explore all organizations that are exploiting all types of victims and how they're committing money laundering, how they're committing tax evasion, how they're committing visa fraud or document fraud and whatnot. So that really has been my focus of the studies that I've done so far.
And, one of the interesting stories you tell me is about how you interview the actual traffickers. How did you even get to that?
No, I can't say. It's literally nothing but the grace of God. That somehow through the, family or friends or connections that I have in South Korea, somehow this guy popped up out of nowhere and somehow he's willing to talk to me. So I just interview him and I just ask God, just expose everything that I need to know. And supposedly he was a successful trafficker in the US and now he fled the country and he's somewhere in East Asia and he's not willing to meet with me in person, obviously, but he was, graciously offered to talk to me. I just kind of portray myself as, human rights advocate, so whatever. He was nice, to me, at least.
Yeah. And that information is so important because that helps us understand how trafficking rings operate, and they all operate very differently. Currently in the city of Houston, everybody's talking about a local teacher that her and her son were involved with recruiting girls and young girls, teenage girls, and selling them for sex. And so it's brought a lot of attention to like child sex trafficking rings. And I feel like a lot of people think this isn't a thing, but are there these large trafficking organizations that are maybe global in reach that are operating here in the United States?
Yes. So it all depends. I think that like you don't hear, Italian mobs operating trafficking organization or getting involved in trafficking ventures, so to speak, in the U.S. anymore, and you don't hear this large criminal organization who are engaging in this commercial sex industry as a mob exploiting multiple victims. But if you actually look through the U.S. Trafficking cases, and some of them are prosecuted as tax evasion or visa fraud or money laundering or just organized crime in general. But if it does mention the women that are being exploited through their ventures. Now, what I'm surprised by is that we're not having a conversation in terms of like strip clubs being owned by Italian mobs. And I say this is a legit case from New York. And this guy owns at least $9 million property under his family's name. And none of these property has been seized properly and were returned to the victim's pockets. So things like that. And as you look deeper into it, I realize that. And I also think it's a problem that we have with the human trafficking investigation in general, that investigators are not getting enough support to be able to investigate financial crime, and they're just solely focused on sex trafficking or labor trafficking exploitation. The victim-centered approach is good as long as the victims are willing to testify and the trafficker go to jail. But a lot of time victims do not want to testify. At that point, do you just leave the traffickers out in the dark world to exploit more victims? No, you have to put them in jail or somewhere and then seize the asset and bring it back to the victim. But I think it's because we're not talking about trafficking organizations that are more serious than just average Joe pimps in general. The one person control one or two victims that are generally runaway or from foster care. These are very low level. That's not to say we have, we're going to ignore these problems, but there's a very small timer trafficker comparing to the organizations that are profiting off of this exploitation.
Yeah. And so, we get calls, we get emails, and, people will let us know, hey, law enforcement did this bust and they arrested 500 people in this human trafficking sting. And I think a lot of people read those headlines and they think, oh, wow, they arrested 500 traffickers. But really, when you read the story, you look at the details, a lot of times those arrests are the buyers. And a very small percentage is the actual trafficker, the one who's kind of overseeing the operation. So could you kind of speak to that? Is that approach effective, or should we really begin to shift to look at, who's really behind running these trafficking operations like in different cities?
So law enforcement is able to respond as much as the public makes a point to encourage them to respond. Now, just as much as like they're...
Hold on. So you're telling me that just the average everyday person has some power in this, has some part to play? Because I feel like our listeners, that's going to be real encouraging, maybe eye-opening to some people who feel like, what can I do?
So the law enforcement is the accountability partner, or the person that they need to listen to is the public. The law enforcement cares deeply about what the public says or do, or what's been reported to media and whatnot. That's why a lot of time they want to press release whenever there's a big bust or a big stings and whatnot. And I don't understand, but maybe like reputation is really important for certain law enforcement. And just as much as like there are good nonprofit, and I've also encountered bad nonprofit, same thing with the law enforcement too. There are good, passionate law enforcement who's done a great job, and they care deeply about victims. So there are other law enforcement who are all about making quota. So to encourage both entities, good and bad law enforcement for the victim's cause, I think that when the public makes a report, or when the public makes outcry and say, hey, what are you doing in my jurisdiction? I see this illicit business, recruiting this woman, and this is my property, whatever, when you're making more noises, that's when law enforcement responds. This is documented study.
And so have you found that, the approach of shutting, because I heard this one researcher, and I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes, but, this one researcher was showing that with these illicit massage parlors, whenever one got shut down, there would be 3 more that would open kind of in the same area. Have you heard of that kind of happening, where it's like we're shutting down the location, but there's still a growing presence in the area of these massage parlors?
So I think I talked about this. Multiple people ask me this question, right? Like the shutting down is not working. There's a phenomenon called, what's it called? Not guacamole, the whack-a-mole.
Yeah, whack-a-mole.
You hit one thing and then something else pop up. I think it's been designed to operate that way. Actually, the trafficker that I spoke to is he ran a massage parlor around the 90s, and he wasn't surprised that at the time that my survivor client was coerced into managing multiple brothels for her trafficker. She said that's a common phenomenon. This is not anything new. That's always been going on. So because you see
that. So you're telling me that there was a survivor, she was trafficked, and then at a certain point he put her in charge of overseeing a massage parlor. Is that like a common?
Yeah, under that bondage.
Okay.
Yeah. But it is also a very common phenomenon. So when you see somebody's name, whether it's a man or woman, someone's name is on business filing as a registered agent, it does not mean that person is the actual trafficker. So I think that, when we're arresting these women and men that are on business filing, we have to remember that whether this person is being coerced into operating brothels, as opposed to this person is actual a brothel owner, chances are these were more likely than not, these people are being used as a nominal owner. That's something that you need to investigate based on your coercion technique that there will be present as you interview these people.
Man, so I mean, if you're thinking like a criminal, that's really a way to hide yourself, because you're utilizing a victim who's now operating a massage parlor, and now she gets seen as the trafficker. She gets seen as the one that's kind of running this thing, and that person who's kind of orchestrating everything is just still in the shadows.
So from the trafficker's point of view, this is what he told me. This particular trafficker ran 7 different brothels. He told me that, number one, arrest or, going into jail, whatnot, these are like business risks. He looks at this brothel operation as a business risk. So when you get arrested, that he calls an accident. So it's just because you're arresting one person, it doesn't mean that he's going to stop operating. He just kind of take it as a part of a business risk, like the rainy day, right? So he has, he thinks about these things, and he get mad at the victims. If victim get, arrested, could that kind of like change the dynamics of his operation. Second thing is that it costs money once the victim is being arrested, and the money that's, obviously at the end of the day is going to come out of victim's pocket, but he still had to front the money to bail her out, to, by lawyer to hire a lawyer to bring it back to the business and whatnot. So these are all the necessary things that kind of take it into account. So you're training your victims not to be arrested. So arrest and the information about the law enforcement tactics are there's two things that are very important to the trafficker's perspective. So one of the biggest goal that I have as a trafficker will be to stay under the law enforcement radar. And it's really important to know and have up to date where the law enforcement is moving and going and how they're applying or how they're targeting my business. So these are the things that I'll watch out for.
And so how do you even, if you're trying to tackle this problem, where do you even start?
I think what really, I'm not being biased when I say this, right? So I've studied strip clubs, I study massage parlors, East Asian trafficking organization. I study domestic minor sex trafficking organization and their network structure, right? The most complicated structure are part of the East Asian organization that are either they're operating massage parlors, indoor brothels, or room salon and whatnot. And then they I will say the second highest, I guess, more complex structure will be strip clubs, I will say.
Yeah.
Unless they're involved in other criminal activities. So looking at the most complex problem that the structure that I see, I think is very important for the law enforcement, especially the human trafficking law enforcement investigators, to be savvy about financial crime, investigating tax evasion and whatnot will be very helpful to their investigation. The only thing that connect these people, a lot of time, especially in the East Asian organizations, that the victims do not necessarily know that they're who their real traffickers are, and it's designed to be that way. There's no reason why smart trafficker needs to let the victims know who they are, right? The only thing that's connecting the dot between the real trafficker or real profiteer or the investor, if you want to call it, as opposed to victim herself, is really the money. So you're following the money. By following the money, you're tracking down the multiple entities that are profiting, sometimes way more than the operator itself.
Yeah, and so to do something like that, I'm not super up to date on like law enforcement practices and all that. I'm not an expert by any means, but that just seems like it would require a lot of collaboration between different agencies.
It does require a lot of collaboration. It does require their supervisor, whoever is in charge, will be interested in this cause. For instance, like a law enforcement can be very passionate about this cause and start, investigating this long chain of, brothel models. But once the supervisor changes, especially on the federal level, once they get a different boss and the boss is not interested in trafficking, that the whole work of, years of work, month of investigation work is just torpedoed. So I think it's important for public to know that human trafficking is a priority, not just for just local law enforcement, but also the federal law enforcement, that it really changed the dynamics of how they respond to the crime.
And do you think these kind of large trafficking rings that are being exposed is kind of helping kind of maybe make people pay more attention and want to do something? Like I'm thinking about, the Jeffrey Epstein thing, the recent P. Diddy stuff that's coming out in the news. Do you think that is helping maybe people take this more seriously?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, because when it comes to trafficking, I don't know if I consider myself as an average Joe. I think maybe if, when it's in the spotlight, when, criminal activities by P. Diddy or whoever is famous is on the spotlight. I do think that kind of, attract more of an interest for the public. But what I hear from the small nonprofits around the country is that sometimes they don't even know their own, children's friends can be at risk of trafficking. So in terms of education and awareness, I guess churches need to be a little more active, and I would love to see that. I think that churches have been very silent, and don't get me wrong, I don't think all churches are like that. I think some churches are very passionate about it, but for the most part, I think that we have been very silent when it comes to political issues, and this is a human rights issues. But I think that we're losing a lot of traction where the church is supposed to be the forefront of the fight.
So if you're a pastor listening, Youngbee, what would that look like for churches to be more involved?
I think that they need to, I know that some of the churches are very active in terms of, helping the shelters or volunteer to shelters or, try to provide for resources for shelter. But I'm talking about like the large denomination in general. And I guess, I may be being judgmental. I don't know, but I see a lot of, I don't know these, but I see a lot of celebrities, celebrity pastors or ministers on Instagram. They talk about that platform. They talk about the t-shirt sale. Oh, nothing wrong with that. Everybody has to raise money, right? Everybody deserves workmen as worthy of one's wages. But I don't really see a whole lot of people talking about the justice for trafficking victims, and I don't know if they ever want to partner with nonprofits who are in the game, in the fight, not the game. I just don't know where they are, and a lot of time I think they want to avoid any sticky conversation because they don't want to offend anyone. And in this day and age, our anti-trafficking movement can be very heated stage when it comes to politics. So maybe that's why they want to stay away from everything. I have no idea, but I do know that.
I know. And this could be another podcast. Because, there have been times where, a church invites us in and it's like, you can't say sex trafficking. You can't say pornography. You can't say this. And at the end of the day, it's like, you're editing. What can I say? Yeah, I can't say anything. But I really, I feel a passion because a lot of people don't realize is really traffickers target young people. And when you shared with me that a lot of the women in the Asian massage parlors were trafficked, since they were children back home, and they've just been trapped in that for years. That was like eye-opening to me and heartbreaking to know that that's someone's like entire life journey. And so, actually, I believe we need to be louder in the message and not edit the message. And I agree. Maybe even being more vocal about, the local area that surrounds your church. Are there places in operation that about, and have you gone to law enforcement, or have you tried to mobilize the community to address that problem?
I think as long as there's I'm generalizing, obviously. I think as long as there is a fear of man as opposed to fear of God, will be instilled in our general culture in terms of how we fight the trafficking. And when I say general culture, I'm talking about the culture of churches. I don't know if anything is going to change because grace of God is grace of God. I'm able to do this because of the grace of God. And I think without the grace of God and you're focusing on fear of man, what will God give you the grace to fight the battle? I don't know, That's what I think.
Yeah. So Youngbee, I'm just curious, in the past, like in the history of the U.S., have we ever had a huge win in a case against a large trafficking ring that's, running these massage parlors? Because that's the main question people ask us is like, I have hundreds of these in my city, what can be done? Has there anything... Is there a historical case that has taken place that has targeted and been successful in kind of shutting down a large ring?
So in the past, in the 90s, at least, I know that before we started using human trafficking law, they used organized crime, RICO, money laundering, or anything that's related to organized criminal activities. That's what they use for the investigation. And they were pretty successful back in the days. And I think we somehow moved away from utilizing organized crime or financial crime to investigate this larger organization by massage parlors, as opposed to right now. I think that we have been focusing on traditional vice unit approach, meaning relying on victims' testimony, which when victim doesn't testify, there is no case to go about it, right? So they've been using that approach just as they use it for domestic minor sex trafficking, where you don't need minors to testify. You can just, as long as there's evidence for prostitution, you can track down the traffickers to put them in jail. But that's not how it is in Asian organized criminal structure behind the massage parlors in general. And in the past, of course, it was successful because we're using RICO, we're using investigation that catches the organized criminal, because this is organized criminal. This is organized crime. And, but for some reason, I think that they move away from it. And I think that one reason that the law enforcement one time told me is that they don't want to use RICO because it takes a lot of time. And it's about prosecutors are about meeting the quota to be able to get promotion, to be able to get whatever they need to go. I don't know. So it's not about the quality of the cases. It's more about the quantity of the cases. So that's why this one prosecutor told me that they're focusing on easier cases, as opposed to if you want to investigate criminal organization like Italian mobs running strip club, or Chinese mobs running massage parlors, along with drug trafficking. That's going to take a lot more sophisticated investigation approach.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. Is there's a lot of dependence on the victim outcry, and especially with the Asian trafficking piece. I mean, a lot of times they don't speak the language. There's that cultural barrier. Even when we're doing outreach, just trying to bring a gift, there's a cultural barrier of like understanding why we're there, what we're doing. And so I can't imagine someone understanding that they've been trafficked and being able to voice that to law enforcement. Especially when there's that fear there, right? Especially when there's, you're going to have to be in a trial court and be able to, go through that whole process, which is very hard for a lot of survivors to do. It just seems like impossible and not the best approach.
I also think that there's a lack of study, and there's really like a deficiency of how much we understand the traffickers or criminal intent or organized crime in the case of Eastern Europeans, but also East Asian.
That's a whole nother topic.
Criminal population. We have little to no data when it comes to understand the criminal tactics behind their operation, as opposed to we have been focusing on victim-centered approach, which I'm not against the victim-centered approach. We need to have a trauma-informed training and victim-centered approach. However, by saying victim-centered approach, you're depending on the victims to prosecute the case and victims' testimony alone. That I think that's more of a cop-out than anything else. And in the East Asian community, for instance, like a lot of victims, as I said, do not know they're traffickers. Even if victims want to testify, they wouldn't know what to say to you because they don't know who their real boss is, right? So in such case, what's going to help is to investigate organized crime and financial crime. That'll help you track down the real profiteer.
Well, Youngbee, this interview has been really interesting. I feel like I have 100 more questions, but we're not going to have the time to answer those in this episode. So if people are interested in learning more about your work, or maybe you're listening to this and you want to get in touch with Youngbee, how do people do that?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. My works are all public on Google Scholar. You can Google my name. My company is on Google. Message me anytime on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you can just search Dale Consulting, Youngbee Dale on LinkedIn, and you have great content on your LinkedIn. I know you've been working hard on getting that going, and you're just consistent with posting, and it's really fresh stuff. I love the insights that you bring, and so thank you for doing this podcast with us. We're going to do a part 2, so if you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for the next one we'll do. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode. If you were inspired by this content today, please share, rate, and leave a review. Also, please consider making a donation at elijahrising.org/donate. Your support helps us continue the vital mission to combat sex trafficking. Until next time.